Hi, everyone. It is John C. Morley, Sir Entrepreneur, here coming at you this evening. It is great to be with you tonight. We have a great show for you. If you're new to IFYL, Inspirations for Your Life, you'll notice there's a QR code at the top right. Take your phone and use it to scan the QR code. That'll direct you over to my link tree, which you can get to by scanning the QR code on my hat, or you can go to Believe, BELIEVE, MEACHIEVE.com, which will get you to my link tree as well, with lots of great information and videos to help you become a better version of yourself and help other people become better versions of themselves as well. Great to have you here. And if you wanted to know, every single day we have a brand new topic for the whole week, and then we have subtopics of modalities every single day that we talk about. All right. And if you're coming back, welcome back, my friends, colleagues, and associates. It's wonderful to have you here with me to share some of this great knowledge. And thank you for being with me for all the time. And hopefully some of the new people will become loyal just like you guys. So our topic for tonight is how to crack your egg. Now, if you remember just the other day, yesterday, I actually cracked an egg live on the channel. And so during the show, I cracked the egg and I explained different things about an egg. But tonight I want to talk about how to crack the egg of education, because I think that's a challenge for a lot of people. So there are many different ways that people learn. One way is auditory. Another way is visual. Another way is kinesthetic. What are you talking about? Well, all right. Have you ever known, whether you're in school or whether somebody's teaching you something, and sometimes you just don't get it? And it's not because they're not explaining it right. It's because you're just not connecting with the information. Maybe they're talking about something and you're not getting it. Maybe they are trying to explain this to you, or they show you something, but you don't work well in that case. You might be more a kinesthetic person. So a kinesthetic person is someone who learns by doing. So let's give an example. Let's say I was going to teach you to bake, okay? So I could teach you to bake by saying, okay, here's what you're going to do. You're going to have your mise en place. You're going to have your counter ready with all these different ingredients, and you're going to have your different containers, setting up your mise en place, and you're going to measure everything out just perfectly so that everything's ready to go. And then you're going to dump them in as you need to. And when you're all done, then you know you've finished that. Always put your, basically, you're going to start off with your wet ingredients in the one bowl, mixing them all up, then going over to your dry bowl, putting your wet or putting your dry into your wet after you've made your wet ingredients. So when we think about that, if you've never baked before, you'd be like, John, I have no clue what you're talking about. Well, what if I was to show you? Well, you might be a little clearer, but maybe you're better off. I said, well, you know what, Brian, the best way for you to learn is, why don't you actually bake? So here's what you're going to do. You're going to crack the 2 eggs. Great. Just like that. You got it. Now you're going to mix this up. So as I get you to be part of it, then you're going to learn. So therefore, you're a kinesthetic learner. But a lot of people I know, when I was in college, they didn't want to teach kinesthetically. They wanted to do things the easiest way possible with the least amount of effort. And so if somebody learns in a different style, that doesn't mean they're dumb. That doesn't mean anything bad about them. It just means they learn differently. Einstein learned differently. And so when we can appreciate how we learn and how we get information into our brain so that it stays there, that's a real gem. Now, the best way to learn is something called immersion. What the heck is immersion? Sounds like something I'm going to see on a planet or something. So what is immersion? If I said learning by immersion. No, I don't mean to go underwater and to soak up things like that. But it's similar. Literally, you teach yourself by becoming part of the environment. So, for example, let's say, I don't know, you want to learn cooking and you want to go watch some YouTube videos, or you want to learn from another chef like myself, and you want to practice. And you learn by doing, you learn by reading, you learn by being part of it. That's immersion. So you're learning by being part of the environment. If you just learn by one way, and that's not the way you learn, well, then it's not going to stick very well, and it's going to be frustrating. So most people have two learning modalities. So there's auditory, there's visual, and it's kinesthetic. Auditory means that you learn by hearing. Visual means you learn by seeing. Okay, kinesthetic, K, means you learn by doing. One thing you might want to learn, for example, is maybe you want to learn algebra. And I'm saying I can't do this by seeing it or hearing people, but you learn by doing. I learned math by doing it. And so, like, you remember the expression, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Well, what did that mean? Do the parentheses first. Excuse, exponents next. M, my dear Aunt Sally, multiplication. D for division, addition last. And so when you got to learn by doing, the next time you did it, it's like, oh, that works. That's why a lot of times when you're studying for a test, one of the ways that math teachers say that you should practice, also science teachers, is that you should practice your homework again and do the questions and do the examples. So if you're able to answer the questions at the end of each history chapter, or if you're able to answer the math equations at the end of each chapter, then you're ready for the test. And so a lot of people would study by reading over their notes, but they wouldn't do so well because they really didn't put themselves into a situation where they could test their knowledge. You're probably saying, well, John, how do I test my knowledge if there's no one there to test me? You can test yourself by answering the questions and then later on looking at the answers in the back of the book. If you don't know something, you can then research what it is and say, oh, gee, you know what? I'm having a problem with homeostasis, or I'm having a problem with osmosis, or I'm having a problem with cell mitosis, or I'm having a problem with understanding what the mitochondria is, or I'm having problems with understanding how do the X and Y chromosomes mate, and how do they cause different traits to be transferred? How does that work? And although it's not hard, when you do it and you see how the result works, you get it. Why is it people don't want to do learning by kinesthetic? It takes more time. And a lot of teachers want to do things fast and quick. And so by doing things in the way that you need is the best way for you to learn them. So a good teacher or instructor should understand and should teach in multiple modalities. So if you are a visual learner, where everyone can see on the board what I've written down. Okay. Now you're going through the rest of the problem. Okay. Does that sound like it makes sense to everyone? So they're using different words. Great. Getting to the end of the thing. Great. Is everyone in the class getting a feel for where I'm going? You're using different words and you're tripping that sense of that learning modality of that person. So you have those three types of people in the classroom. But I know a lot of times I went to a classroom and everyone says, do you understand where I'm going? Or can you see what I'm talking about? And then people would just be like, okay, great. Well, do you see it or not? And they keep asking the same question. Do you see it or not? And the class is silent because they don't learn by seeing. They learn a different way. Maybe they learn by auditory. Now, you're going to have two learning modalities. One will be your primary and one will be your secondary. So if a teacher doesn't know how to teach to all those modalities, he or she is doing you a disservice as a teacher, as a professor, as an instructor? Because as a teacher, we want to make sure that the information gets imparted off to you, that the learning experience is fun, and then you're able to take that information and grow from it. A lot of instructors don't teach, they lecture. Lecturing is not teaching. We might say, well, gee, I have a PhD and that's how I do it. Well, that's fine, but that's not teaching. That's just reading notes. We had a non-Western culture teacher, which is basically our history, when I was in high school. And he would have us read the book, then he would have us spend at least 45 minutes, and he would be teaching, and he would be writing on the board, and then we'd have to write we saying, or he'd be saying things, and we have to take notes, and it was the most boring. When I tell you thing, it was really boring because he wasn't making connections. Like when we talk about the Indians and the tribes. Okay, so what we have here, so maybe he should have drew a picture like, okay, this is the such and such Indians. This is the Okinawa Trail. And he just did it all as words. And so, if you didn't get it, you didn't pass his class. And what he didn't understand is that he thought people were being lazy, but they weren't. But the only way he was teaching was by words. And so they have to adapt to the student. A lot of times you might have homework. Maybe it's a math class. And you do the problem, you go up to the board and you do it. So that's one of the best ways. If you're kinesthetic, you go up to the board and you do problem 5 or problem 6 on the board, whatever problem it is. Then do you agree with that answer? Yes or no? And then so you could see it, we could talk about it. So you're getting different things exposed. But I think a lot of times people get hung up with just one learning modality because that's what they are, they figured, and they don't need to learn anything else. But when you learn that you have a second learning modality, you actually strengthen the ability of learning and retaining. That bell curve basically changes, so you're able to retain a lot better. And so when you realize that learning, or we'll say cracking that egg, can be so frustrating because you're like, oh, I don't get it. And then another teacher explains it to you, and I'm like, oh, that's all we need to do. We just need to move that little dot, or we need to do that. Yeah, that's it. And the other teacher would be like, oh, I could have told him that, but you didn't. So a good teacher is one that learns by watching and evaluating the student, not to judge them, but to figure out how can they convey the information in a way that's going to make he or she remember more. I'm going to give you a tip to crack your own egg. The more learning modalities you use, even though you have 2, we have auditory, visual, and kinesthetic. Now, the more senses you use, the better chances you have of learning are. So we have things like olfactory, right? We have taste. So the more that we can involve our senses, the more we're going to learn, right? Maybe you were in the kitchen and one of the senses you were using was your nose to smell things. How does it smell? Does it taste? And so these are things that can help stroke whether you're in the right path. What I found with a lot of college teachers are they're very smart. However, they don't want to deviate past the point of how they teach. If they teach by, open your books and we're going to write. And so in the process of doing this, we will add 2 times the product minus the sum to give us the answer. And they're reading and you're writing and you have no clue what's going on because all they're doing is reading. And then they spend maybe a minute. Okay, let's go through an example. The example is like 30 seconds. They spent all this time writing down the theory, but you really didn't understand what the theory was about. So how are you supposed to pass a test? How are you supposed to remember something if you can't even understand it? Now, I'm not talking about being lazy. I'm talking about the fact that it does not compute. It doesn't make sense. If I was to talk to you right now about physics, I would probably lose a lot of people. If I was to talk to you guys about chemistry, I might lose some people. If I was to talk to you guys about making a smoothie or making a drink at home, I would probably get everyone's attention. They say, well, gee, doing something in chemistry is very similar to making a smoothie, although we mix ingredients for the periodic table instead of elements. Like and at home, we don't use elements, we use other things like ingredients, and those ingredients we can eat and taste and drink. But in the lab, we can't taste them. And these items in the lab have different proton numbers, right? How many nucleus, how many electrons are in. So this is the thing that's important. When you realize that we can pair something to something you already know, like you know how to mix the two things, you know how to do all this right stuff, great. So now in the periodic table, we have to measure just like you have to measure for your shake. The only thing in chemistry, we have to make sure we put this first, and we never add, right? Let me ask you a question, see if everybody's paying attention. Is it okay to add an acid to a base? Is it okay to add a base to an acid? Think about that for now. Just think about that for 1 second. Why should you never add an acid to a base or base to an acid? So if acids and bases mix, it results in a very violent neutralization. If a strong acid such as hydrochloric acid is mixed with strong bases such as sodium hypochlorite, it results in a violent chemical reaction that would produce a lot of heat and gas. So, and you never want to add water to an acid, okay? Or a base. And what should you do instead? So, if you add acid to water, the solution that forms it is very dilute, okay? Small amount of heat is released, not enough to vaporize and spatter. So, adding acid to water is okay, but doing it the other way around, that's a problem. So always add acid to water, never in the reverse. Because if you add them in the reverse, you're going to have a very violent reaction. But you wouldn't have known that unless you saw a video or you learned the logic. So what's important, especially when you're going through safety trainings, and I did things like OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, they make sure you understand things from a visual perspective, an auditory perspective, and then they have you do an experiment. But what they do make sure is before you do experiment, now remember, before you do the experiment, you never add, right? You never add the water, right, to the base, right? And so they may have this like all over the place saying you should never add water to an acid, excuse me, because of that reaction. Because remember, what water is a base. So you basically you can basically add acid to the water, but you never add it the other way around. So if you add water to an acid, it's a problem. Okay, so you never add water to an acid or to a base because of the reaction we just told you about. Now, if you mix a strong acid with a strong base, they'll react. Okay. And there could be some issues. So we never add water to a base. Okay. Never add water to an acid, never add it to a base. Right. So that's very, very important. So the question is it better to add an acid to a base or base to an acid? What do you think from what I've just told you? If a base is added to an acidic solution, the solution becomes less acidic and moves toward the middle of the pH scale, right? So what happens if you mix what happens is it okay to is it okay to mix a base to an acid? Is that okay? So mixing acids and bases can be extremely dangerous because they cause what we call chemical reactions. So the basic reason why chemical reactions occur is the energy is released, right? And as we know, chemical reactions basically burn. There's fire, there's reactions, there's heat. And when you mix acids and bases, heat is released very quickly by a chemical reaction. Sometimes the heat is enough to promote a vigorous reaction. In the case, the heat may not be able to escape quickly, so it heats up the reactant, perhaps to form a gas or bubbles or foam or something like that. And sometimes it can cause an explosion. So it's never good to mix acids and bases. And the mixture can boil, it can start splashing around, and you can have issues with yourself because if you're not wearing protective gear, well, you could be seriously injured by that splatter. All right, so where we're trying to go tonight is just understanding that how to crack the egg of your mind for being able to learn is finding out, are you an auditory, a kinesthetic, or a visual? And you probably know right now what I'm saying to you. Does this sound like it makes sense? Do you see what I'm trying to explain to you? Are you feeling comfortable with the type of information I'm sharing with you tonight? Which one of those three resonated with you the most? And what's the one that was resonating with you, but not as strong as the first one? That's your second learning modality. We'll talk more about that in other videos, but I thought this is really important to share with you. This whole week, we're talking about how to crack the egg in your life in many different areas. I'm John C. Morley. I'm a serial entrepreneur. It's been a pleasure. It's been a privilege. It's been an honor to be with you again this evening. Please be sure to like, support, love my channel. Comment below. How do you crack your egg? And what kind of eggs do you want to crack in your life? What are you trying to learn the magic formula for? Tag your friends, colleagues, and associates. Share this out with everyone you know on social media. And then be sure, ladies and gentlemen, to go to my YouTube channel, John Space E Space MORLEY Space Serial Entrepreneur, and look for that key phrase to help keep our content free. And then make the choice, ladies and gentlemen, to buy my team that cup of coffee. You know, we'll be so grateful with those pennies and dollars. We'll invest into new hardware, new technology, new equipment, new software, new facilities to give you the most jaw-dropping motivational content. I thank you so much for tuning in and watching our second episode for the week. We've got lots more to come, so continue to tune in for how to crack the egg in your life in many different areas. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Have yourself a great Memorial Day, and I'll see you at the end of the day.